Something really interesting is starting to build around the Seahawks. And honestly, this is one of those conversations that could end up dividing the entire fan base. At first, it sounds like a crazy idea, but once you look at everything that's happening behind the scenes, you start to realize there may actually be some logic to it. The big question is whether Seattle is approaching a point where a surprising decision could make more sense than anyone expected. There's one specific scenario that's gaining attention, and if it ever happened, it could completely change the outlook for one player while creating a new opportunity for the Seahawks moving forward. So stick with me until the end, because we're going to break down exactly why this idea is suddenly being talked about, what it could mean for Seattle, and whether it's actually a move worth considering. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that like button if you're excited for more Seahawks content, and let me know down in the comments right now. If you were making the decision, would you keep things exactly the way they are, or would you be open to making a surprising move? The possibility of the Seattle Seahawks moving on from Jalen Milroe has suddenly become one of the most interesting discussions surrounding the team. And while nothing has happened yet, the idea is now being seriously debated because of how the current quarterback situation appears to be taking shape. The discussion comes from an article by 12th Man Rising that explored whether Milroe could become a trade candidate and even suggested the Green Bay Packers as a logical destination if Seattle ever decided that his future no longer fit their plans. It is a fascinating scenario because it is not based on Milroe lacking talent, but rather on whether there is actually room for him to develop in Seattle's current quarterback room. The biggest reason this conversation even exists is because of how the quarterback depth chart is being viewed. The belief presented is that Seattle currently has 3 quarterbacks, but realistically may only need 2. Even better for the organization would be needing only 1 healthy starter throughout the season. From that perspective, the current expectation is that Sam Darnold is firmly positioned as the team's quarterback, while Drew Lock has earned trust as a capable backup. If that assessment remains true throughout training camp and beyond, then Milroe becomes the quarterback without a clear path to meaningful playing time. That is not presented as criticism of Milroe personally. Instead, it is viewed as a roster construction issue. The discussion emphasizes that moving him would not necessarily be because Seattle has given up on him, but because another organization might have both the patience and the opportunity to invest in his development. At the same time, Seattle could recover value from a player who may not have a significant role if the current quarterback hierarchy remains unchanged. The conversation becomes even more interesting when Milroe's recent development is examined. During OTAs and minicamps, the transcript notes that he struggled with turnovers and that the issues which had followed him earlier in his football career did not appear to be fully corrected yet. That naturally raises questions about how quickly he can become a dependable NFL quarterback. However, the discussion also makes it clear that those concerns do not erase his upside. In fact, the argument is that Milroe still possesses enough physical talent that another franchise could be willing to bet on his long-term potential. One of the strongest points made in support of Milroe is that many observers focus almost exclusively on his weaknesses while overlooking the qualities that made him such an intriguing prospect in the first place. Accuracy questions and turnovers are often the first topics mentioned whenever his name comes up. But there is another side to the evaluation. His arm strength remains a significant asset. His athletic ability allows him to create plays with his legs. His running ability gives offensive coordinators additional flexibility. Those traits cannot simply be ignored because they continue to offer developmental value for any coaching staff willing to invest time in him. The transcript even suggests that Alabama may have placed difficult demands on Milroe, implying that some of the criticism directed toward him does not fully account for the circumstances in which he played. That does not erase the mistakes or pretend the concerns are gone, But it does present the possibility that another coaching staff could view him differently and believe there is still considerable room for improvement. The Green Bay Packers emerge as the proposed destination largely because of how their quarterback situation compares to Seattle's. Jordan Love remains the established starter, but injuries have forced him to miss games in previous seasons. Because of that, Green Bay has already experienced the importance of having a reliable backup quarterback available whenever needed. The discussion points to Malik Willis as an example of how Green Bay benefited from having another option ready when circumstances changed. According to the transcript, Willis performed well when called upon, reinforcing the idea that quality quarterback depth is essential over the course of a long NFL season. That experience could encourage Green Bay to continue investing in developmental quarterbacks who possess physical tools and long-term upside. Another element supporting the fit involves stylistic similarities. Rather than simply looking for any backup quarterback, the argument is that teams benefit most when the reserve can operate the offense in ways that resemble the starter. If both quarterbacks possess comparable athletic traits and movement skills, the offense requires fewer adjustments whenever the backup enters the game. That is where Milroe becomes an intriguing possibility. The discussion argues that while his style is not identical to Jordan Love's, there are enough similarities to make the transition more natural than it would be with some other quarterbacks. Milroe's mobility, strong arm, willingness to attack downfield, and ability to extend plays create a profile that could make him a more comfortable developmental backup within that environment. The comparison is not presented as saying Milroe has already reached Love's level or that he is guaranteed to do so. Instead, it highlights the idea that Green Bay could see enough overlapping traits to justify taking a chance on his long-term development. That possibility becomes even more compelling because of another factor discussed in the transcript: confidence in Green Bay's coaching staff. Matt LaFleur is described as someone capable of helping quarterbacks improve. The conversation references Malik Willis again, arguing that Green Bay's coaching environment helped maximize his value after an earlier stage of his career had produced limited results. Whether every observer agrees with that conclusion or not, the central argument remains that organizations with proven quarterback development can often view raw prospects differently than teams facing immediate competitive priorities. If Green Bay believes its coaching staff can refine Milroe's decision-making while preserving the athletic strengths that already exist, then acquiring him becomes a much more understandable move. From Seattle's perspective, that could create an opportunity to receive draft compensation for a player who may otherwise spend valuable development time without a clear path to meaningful snaps. Even so, not every part of the original proposal receives agreement. The discussion pushes back against the suggestion that Seattle could receive a third- or fourth-round draft pick in return. That expectation is described as unrealistic. Instead, the opinion presented is that a fifth-round selection would represent a far more believable outcome if negotiations ever reached that stage. The reasoning is straightforward. Expecting equal or greater value than where Milroe was originally selected would likely be asking too much under the current circumstances. Even with that lower expectation, the trade is still viewed as worthwhile because additional draft capital could provide flexibility in future roster building. Rather than allowing a player with limited opportunities to remain buried on the depth chart, Seattle could potentially convert that asset into another resource for future decisions if the organization ultimately concludes that Milroe is no longer part of its long-term quarterback plan. For now, though, it remains exactly what it is: a discussion based on possibility rather than confirmation. No trade has happened. No official indication has been presented that Seattle intends to move Milroe. Instead, the conversation asks whether the current quarterback landscape makes such a move logical if the organization believes Sam Darnold has secured the future of the position and Drew Lock has established himself as the preferred backup. With training camp approaching and every practice carrying increased importance, the coming weeks could provide much clearer answers about where Jalen Milroe truly stands within Seattle's plans. If his development accelerates, the discussion could fade quickly. If the depth chart continues to look exactly as it does now, however, speculation about his future is unlikely to disappear anytime soon. What do you think about this possibility? If you were in John Schneider's position, would you keep developing Jalen Milroe in Seattle? Or would you consider trading him while he still holds value? There is also another important layer to this discussion that cannot be ignored. Every NFL team has to balance patience with practicality, especially at quarterback. Developing a young passer takes time, but roster spots are limited, and if the coaching staff already feels comfortable with its top two options, the opportunity for a third quarterback to receive meaningful repetitions becomes increasingly difficult. That is why the possibility of moving Milroe is even being discussed. It is less about abandoning a prospect and more about recognizing the reality of the current roster. From Seattle's perspective, if Sam Darnold truly establishes himself as the long-term answer under center, the priorities naturally change. Instead of waiting years to discover whether Milroe can eventually become a starter, the organization could decide that acquiring additional draft capital better serves its long-term plans. Even a fifth-round selection, as suggested in the discussion, could become a valuable asset, depending on how the front office chooses to use it in the future. Another point raised is the value of future draft resources. The conversation specifically references the 2027 NFL Draft as one that is expected to be historically strong. Because of that belief, accumulating selections could provide Seattle with additional flexibility. Those picks could eventually be used to add young talent to the roster or potentially become part of future trades that help strengthen the team in other areas. From that perspective, moving a player who may not have a defined role could be viewed as smart asset management rather than simply giving up on a young quarterback. At the same time, none of this changes the fact that Milroe still possesses intriguing physical tools. His athleticism remains one of the biggest reasons another franchise could be interested. His ability to make plays with his legs creates opportunities that not every quarterback can offer, while his arm strength continues to stand out as another trait that coaches may believe they can develop. Those qualities explain why this discussion is happening at all. If there were no upside, there would likely be little interest from another team. The proposed connection to Green Bay also continues to revolve around development rather than immediate expectations. The idea is not that Milroe would arrive and challenge for the starting job. Instead, the belief is that he could spend time learning behind Jordan Love while working within a coaching environment that has been credited with helping quarterbacks improve. If that development eventually pays off, Green Bay could benefit from having invested in a talented young player before his value potentially increases. For Seattle, however, everything still depends on one major question. Does the organization believe Jalen Milroe will eventually have an opportunity to contribute? Or does the current quarterback situation make that path too difficult to realistically expect? Until that answer becomes clear, speculation will continue surrounding his future. Training camp now becomes the next major checkpoint. Every practice, every preseason opportunity, and every evaluation will provide the coaching staff with additional information. If Milroe shows noticeable improvement, particularly in the areas where concerns have been raised, the conversation could quickly shift back toward his long-term development in Seattle. On the other hand, if the depth chart remains unchanged and the coaching staff continues to see Darnold as the unquestioned starter, with Drew Lock firmly holding the backup role, then the possibility of exploring trade options may become a much more realistic topic. What makes this entire debate so compelling is that there are reasonable arguments on both sides. Keeping Milroe allows Seattle to continue developing an athletic quarterback with significant physical upside. Trading him could allow the organization to recover value from a player who currently appears to face an uphill battle for playing time. Neither outcome has been confirmed, but both possibilities are now part of the discussion as the Seahawks move closer to training camp. Ultimately, this remains a hypothetical scenario built around the current roster situation and the belief that another organization, particularly Green Bay, could see an opportunity where Seattle may no longer have one. Whether anything ever materializes is impossible to know at this stage, but it is certainly a storyline worth monitoring as the next phase of the offseason unfolds. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the latest Seahawks news. Leave a like if you found this discussion interesting, and be sure to click on the video that's on your screen next for even more Seahawks coverage. The latest Seahawks updates and breaking news are the first things you'll find right here. Go, Hawks!